how the cost per megawatt tied in there. That's what I was curious about.
Yeah, it's just
limiting ourselves. That's
level
all.
language, but you're right, it'll change as the future happens. Solar panel will be making more energy, they say, with less size too. You know, you may be a contractor looking to decommission one of these sites per megawatt. It's probably a certain acreage, and that number could come down. The acreage too. You don't know.
Yep.
Tom, on page 5 of 51, the purpose, 5.71, the last sentence there, it appears that decommissioning and has been removed. I'd like to see that my colleagues with me on this one. The purpose of this section is to regulate solar photovoltaic installation by providing standards for the placement, design, construction, operation, monitoring. You can read the rest, right? You see where it comes down to with the general neighborhood in which they are likely to provide adequate financial assurances for the cost of removal. I would like to retain for the cost of decommissioning and removal.
So putting back the word decommissioning.
Yeah, don't strike it, if you don't mind, if my colleagues agree, just leave it. I want that word decommissioning pretty much throughout the paperwork itself.
On page 561, the issue with the trees, I stated it the last time, I don't see.
That came up again at the planning board meeting, and I warned them that may go altogether.
I don't see the full value of it, and I see it as more of a hindrance than a help in this process. I understand, the value of trees. I just went through this with the zoning board review the other night, that I went for a variance just to save a tree in my yard. So I understand the value of trees, but if you stop and step back and look at what the whole point that's driving solar is for the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, not so much to save trees, and I'm not saying that we don't want to, but that's not the issue, is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That's what the driving force is. And it's been proven and shown that solar voltaic panels will have a greater carbon offset than trees will. And that's what's driving this whole thing right now. And I'm not saying just go in there and we can clear cut the forest wherever we want and put them in there. There are certain regulations. So I just don't see how this is gonna be helpful, or how it's really gonna be monitored. A guy goes in on his property, even if it's a 6-acre piece of land, and he's got 80 trees that fit that parameter. How can I tell him where to put them?
Yeah, that's why they said anywhere in town. The key change it was anywhere. If you saw where that came from in terms of its starting point, it's actually it's at least understandable at this point. But I can see why you still are.
I personally don't see it, and I would look to have it stricken from this part of it.
Can I actually speak to it? I actually like it in there. I think, one, we're going to be talking about this for some period of time, and people are going to forget that maybe it's not a requirement. The way I'm reading this, it's just a requesting. There's nothing in there that says that the planning or zoning board can deny you for not putting in the trees. It's something that they can ask. So I get the argument for not being there, but I'm one of those people that will not believe that solar is going to. You can't reduce the amount of. You can't say that trees, by cutting down trees, you're actually benefiting carbon offset. The whole science thing I'm not going to get into. We've discussed this a lot over time. Say that you can clear cut trees and not replace them. I mean, there's reasons why people go to such extreme lengths to preserve forested areas, and they're not going there to say, yeah, let's just clear cut them for the sake of a solar panel. It's just in there that it's like a nice to have language. I think it makes sense to have it there, but unless I'm wrong, Tom, it's not saying that they can deny it if a tree isn't planted.
No, and actually you made me read it again, and it did start with, it says actually for projects requesting dimensional relief for size. So there was this connotation that it's for those projects that want to go bigger than 6 acres too. So it doesn't apply to all of them, right? But those that want to do the larger systems would apply to them.
But I can show you the reports. I get a report every month on my solar panels. I have 21 solar panels on my house every month. it's between 8 and 14 trees on offset on my 1/4 acre piece of land. I couldn't put 8 more trees on my property, so I know that it's a proven thing that it has a greater carbon offset. I'm not saying there's no value in the trees, I'm not saying that, I'm just saying that to stop tying certain trees and only specific trees in this thing, I don't think it's necessary.
Am I missing something? We're talking about carbon offsets. What about, we have the Amazon basin, which is the supply of much of the oxygen in the world, where, not waste, it's being slashed and burned. I think trees give back more than what we really recognize right away. They give back oxygen, they give back shade, they give back habitats for wildlife. I don't know, I kind of like the language staying in there that trees should be a 1-to-1 ratio of tree replacement anywhere in town. So I'm not.
How do you enforce that? That's my.
Well, you have to
Just don't plant the project.
have a botanist or botanist come in and count the trees before they cut them down.
Yeah, but where are you going to replace them?
That'll be
1-to-1 replacement.
That, I know. It gets Hallowell. This is how it said Hallowell. Okay.
Devil made you do it.
Yes, yes. The devil made you do it.
The reason I like it is that I think that if it's, I understand that it might be a hard thing to enforce, but if you're going over the 6 acres and someone really wants to put that in, they should have to comply with it. I mean, we have to eventually at some point say what's best for the town. Is it clear cutting and deforesting areas of 12, 20, 40 acres?
Or 180, like
is
that's
it,
in my backyard.
or is it saying that we're good stewards of the environment going forward, and that we need to do everything we can to ensure that the North Smithfield we pass on to a future generation is better, if not, I mean, I guess it's better than what it was today. And so that's why I like it. I think it's being a good steward. I think it's being, mindset of looking forward. And again, we shouldn't be catering, and I've made this argument before, we shouldn't be catering to a developer because they want to come in and clear cut. So you can't, I get that you may use the carbon offset on a roof, or you may on a garage, or somewhere in a residential area. But when you start clear cutting acres of forest, that is hard to offset with saying that a solar panel is better than a tree.
The issue that I have, and the administrator wants, but the issue I have is enforcement. If we can put all the laws we want here, if we can't enforce them or they're not easily enforced, it creates more problems than it resolves. You had something, Mr. Administrator?
Fences are on
Yes.
swimming pools.
This starts with the premise that for projects requesting dimensional relief for size, you already have control over that. You don't have to grant it. It's not an automatic circumstance that you have to grant it. The only reason that we have the 180 acres is because a council wanted it. Whatever the reasoning was, that's why we have the 180 acres.
Yeah, well, how do we stop it?
A
Man,
council.
you're out of order,
Oh,
please.
I know.
A council wanted it. Now, so that was a consideration that was made. And in any decision like that, these considerations can be made, whether it's trees, streets, whatever, rock, you name it. You have the authority to put conditions on things. You're actually limiting your ability here. You may not want this at some point in the future. Regulating trees is going to be a very difficult place to go.
We can't regulate required fences around swimming pools in this town. Yeah, it's tough.
Parking or anything else, good luck.
Ma'am, did you wish to address the council?
When I contact,
Huh?
when I get it.
I'm done here.
Yeah, but we can
You want to
interject
address the
publicly.
council?
President, before you take comment, I just want to give the council a sense of order. When you finish with the comments, my suggestion is going to be make a decision on the proposals provided by the planning board, and then a separate vote, make a list or
changes.
the changes on top of that. Otherwise, it's gonna get confusing for the clerk as well as everybody.
Does.
So if you could do it, like, just do it that way, so we don't, if we're focused on voting on the document that's in front of you first, the changes on the board. If you could, I would appreciate it.
Megan Staples, 75 Bellevue Avenue. I'm also an alternate on the planning board. I just wanted to come up to speak to some of the changes that were suggested by the planning board, only because what I'm hearing is not quite, the narrative here is not what's happening at the planning board meeting.
So just a point of clarification, are you here addressing us as a member of the planning board?
No, I'm addressing you as me with my comments, not as a member of the planning board.
Just need to clarify that.
Okay. So in the dimensional table, the special use that was turned to use by right, the planning board's understanding and agreement on this was that bringing in new options for solar developers is going to increase the business that's done in town. It's going to increase overall revenue. There are already other communities in Rhode Island that are doing solar canopies on wastelands and retail spaces, and it's not an issue financially. It's actually a generator. We also wanted to make sure that the accessory use was in there, especially for some of the commercial and manufacturing spaces, because a lot of them are saying that they're having trouble coming up with long-term tenants. A lot of it has to do with energy. My father has worked in manufacturing my entire life. He worked at Polytop until it closed. He's been bouncing around manufacturing companies all over Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, and New Hampshire since I was born. And all of the jobs are leaving. The only places in Rhode Island that are keeping the manufacturing jobs and long-term leases that are able to grow companies that are getting bigger here are the ones that can provide subsidies or have lower rent to lease the commercial spaces. There's really not any other incentive we can think of that we present that will help bring them back. And in terms of using the space for solar versus more room, I've been fighting on the planning board to make sure that residential spaces aren't ending up in commercial spaces since I've been on the planning board, and that keeps happening. And everyone keeps telling me it's because we don't have enough commercial tenants, and commercial tenants don't want to come here. So we're putting houses and condos where we should have commercial units. So the logic doesn't jive. I'm getting, we're not using the land appropriately, but when I raise the same issue, I'm getting told, well, we don't have enough commercial anything, and we just have to put houses here. So if a company or a commercial or manufacturing company needs a subsidy to bring in a tenant, energy is the subsidy you want. There was one, has a clean room in one of his commercial properties that costs, is it hundreds of thousands per year? Insane amounts of money. He can't get anyone to move in because nobody can afford their clean room. So things like that are going to be the thing that gets him a tenant and gets him making money. If there's someone who's in a commercial space that owns more land and they're growing really fast and they don't need the help, they're not going to put commercial solar there. It's not going to do anything for them. They're going to need that space. The nature of the company itself is going to dictate whether the solar goes there or not. Allowing them to put it there and making it less difficult for them to put it there doesn't mean they don't still have to abide by all of the regulations in here. You still can't see it. They still have to abide by all the zoning and all the setback. this doesn't mean that it's gonna be a big, ugly thing, you know, if we have residential on the edge of commercial land. That's absolutely not the case at all. All we're doing is trying to give people who owned large commercial spaces in town, who are having trouble renting and finding and keeping tenants, another option to be resilient. If offsetting their energy costs can be taken out of the lease and the lease goes down, you get tenants to come in. That was the whole point around the planning board conversation. And even at the last meeting, when we discussed turning the Ys back to S's, all of us agreed that this overall is going to help commercial real estate in town. And I think to do anything else is a step backwards. We're trying to bring in more industries and more ways to make us more money without negatively impacting the nature of our town. Nobody has moved here because they want to see solar and commercial development everywhere. We're trying to keep it all condensed, but give developers and real estate owners options so they can do more with the land that we have. Unfortunately, we can't make the town bigger. You can't annex part of Barville to keep your rural nature and separate, you know, the houses from. But everything we're doing, we're trying to maximize the profit that we can get from all of the commercial space we have without infringing on our residential property. So that was very important to me. I felt like I had to get that out because I wasn't hearing that echoed here, but that's what's been coming through the planning board. So, any questions at all? Any comments that I can address? No? Okay.
Thank you.
Once again, I'll introduce myself as Bethany 11, 234 Greenville Road. 22 years ago, I bought my property, and my oldest was 10 days old. Could have moved anywhere. I chose here. I chose here for the school system, and I also chose here for the property. I didn't move into a neighborhood where my daughter would have neighbors to play with. I didn't move in a neighborhood for my second daughter, who was born 23 months later, to have neighbors. I wanted them to grow up just the way they did. Looking at woods, all the wildlife, from Fisher, which, you know, everyone's scared of, but used to have them, don't see them, to every single species that's on my property a mile up this road. Now, you take this 180-acre solar farm, you have it come in, what do I see? A little bit of trees, and then solar panels. But worse is the runoff that I already have issues just with National Grid that they've caused. In 22 years, I could never hear the highway. Yep, only a half a mile from it. Could never hear it. Now I can, at all hours. Because deforestation's already happened enough. But this town allowed this solar farm to go in without considering my quality of life and what you're doing to the habitat and the animals. We have northern brownback. I know for a fact that I had spent $1,500 getting the colony out of my attic safely. Nobody looked into that, right? It's blood money, and nobody cares. And I'm too upset to speak anymore.
Anyone else wishing to speak in the public forum?
Cynthia Roberts, 49 Week Street. I've been following this issue for several years and speaking out on it when I can, and also attending planning board meetings. And I want to speak to the issue of talking about trees and solar panels as if they're equivalent, because they're not. So you might be able to get some equivalence of like how much carbon is stored in solar versus in trees, but there's an ecological perspective that is not being reflected in the conversation here, and that's why we study things like human ecology, public health, environmental science, and why Gaia is a theory and it's because things are interconnected with each other. And I just want to honor what our neighbor was saying over here. I don't know if she left. That I understand her emotion, because it's very disheartening when everything just comes down to technical dollars and cents and square inches of photovoltaic surfaces, because it's much more than that. And if we want to live into a future that's actually sustainable and will support life and encourage people to be happy where they are, it's not correct to break it down in those component parts and compare them. And that's what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about boards and commissions and talking about economics versus philosophy, because economics has a philosophy. There isn't a monolithic way of thinking about economics. And there's many people in this community who love and care about the land and our place in the land and how we feel in the land. And we care about things like drainage and water. I personally grew up in the neighborhood where the salmon and mill affected many people's wells. And there was a point in time when people made decisions about what could be put there and what couldn't. And now we have two fully square Superfund sites in North Smithfield, and then one that borders North Smithfield and Burrville. And we bear a disproportionate burden of that in Rhode Island. And everything that's happening with solar is really similar. And then the conversations are reductionistic in this room. And it's disappointing because we're complex people. The way we live is complex, but the way this gets talked about is dollars and cents, and it's much more than that. That's not why people live here. And I don't accept the analysis about how it's like all the same or even better to have solar. Right now, and I always say this every time I come up here, I work in public health, we're actually planting more trees. CDC is